You can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. So John, can you tell us your ejection from the F4? That must have been incredible.
Yeah, it was sort of what I guess I would call a big day out and a pretty profound experience, but I think we have to put some context really onto it. So it's a long time ago now, going back to 1987, autumn of 1987. We just had the 70th anniversary on the squadron. The squadron was pretty charismatic. Treble One had the lightning flash on the nose, the grey Phantoms, the lightning flashes everywhere, yellow and gold colours, and the boss was very much into being a real fighter squadron commander. We just celebrated the 70th anniversary of the squadron's formation just about a month before. We'd had a lot of the Black Arrows pilots who'd flown the Hunters over the Paris Air Show. I think 22 Hunters in close formation, which I think still stands as a world record. So lots of those pilots were back. And as part of it, the boss sort of wanted to recreate the Black Arrows and the ethos to celebrate the 70th. And part of that was the Diamond 9 formation, 9 Phantoms flying over for the old boys to have a look at and reminisce, as well as we had quite a few other aeroplanes coming in for a great weekend actually. And in a way we thought it was over, but actually the boss then wanted to do a little bit more. Coming up was the annual Lucas Battle of Britain Air Show. So for that we weren't going to recreate a Diamond 9, but we're going to have a smaller formation of 5 jets doing a few manoeuvres over the airfield for the day. So come the Monday morning, September the 7th, that's a day that's locked in my memory for forever I think, we were going to fly the first practice. Now, I was the first tourist at the time. I only had about 180 hours on the jet, 22, but pretty excited to be part of now what was going to be the 5 ship. So early on the Monday morning, we're in the briefing room, mugs of tea in hand, and we're ready to go and brief and get ready for the first trip. Now, the main centerpiece of the mission was going to be called the St. Andrew's Cross. It had been designed by the squadron commander, it had gone down to 11 group for approval, but on the day the squadron commander was on leave, so it was going to be led by one of our flight commanders. Indeed, the formation was incredibly experienced. I was by far the most junior guy in there as a nav, but you know, we had 2 squadron execs in the formation, a lot of guys there with 1,000 hours plus. So I just thought, A, very privileged to be in this room, very excited, but there were a lot of guys in there who really knew what they were doing. Now, the formation, I'll give you a picture later so you'll be able to use that graphic, but it's basically like an X, or the St. Andrew's Cross. So we had 2 jets leading, flying line abreast in close formation. I was in the front right of those 2 jets. There was then a jet just behind the 2 of us. That formed the center point of the X, and then 2 jets behind there that were the trailing edge. So when it was looked at from above, or by the crowds below, you're going to have an X. Hence the St. Andrew's Cross being based at Lucas in Scotland. Now, there are a few things about the design of the formation that went through the approval process. First of all, flying line abreast, that's a difficult formation to fly. You normally fly, say, echelon, line astern. There are no reference points for those formation patterns that you're flying, but line abreast, not so. So it's more difficult for actually the pilots to maintain. So my pilot was maintaining formation on the leader, who is the front left aircraft. Hopefully with me so far. In the X, in the center, that pilot was also formating on the front left aircraft. So you now can see that in between the front right and the center, that formation station keeping was being done by the navigators.
Right.
Fair enough so far.
Yeah.
Now, the original formation was going to have the jet in the center step down slightly in altitude. That's standard, and that just gives you a little bit of deconfliction, but also helps just with the known formation keeping points. On the day, it was decided to tighten up the formation, that little bit of vertical separation would be taken out. So the jet in the center would be flying in the same plane as the jets at the front of the formation. When you have the picture, this will all make sense. The jets at the rear were still stepped down as standard, formating on the center aircraft. The decision, once that decision was taken to basically take out the vertical separation between the front pair and the jet in the center, that sealed the fate of what was going to happen later on in the day. Now, part of the brief was giving responsibilities about who was doing what, and as the nav in the front right, it was my job really to be looking over my shoulder, looking at the jet, same height, just behind over my left shoulder, and give my pilot inputs on how we were doing formation keeping.
Right.
Yeah, I thought, guys have done this before. They know what they're doing. This will be fine. So, mugs of tea go to the crew room. We put our flying kit on, just external flying kit. It's September. And then we go to the jets. Now for ourselves, we are borrowing a jet for the day off 43 Squadron, our sister squadron. So XT861 was the registration, Alpha Charlie. A couple of things about this aircraft. First of all, it was the last aircraft in the fleet that still had the old standard sort of grey-green camouflage from the 70s, early 80s. And the second thing about the aircraft, it was a twin sticker. We flew the FG1 version of the Phantom. When they came into service, I think there were 4 twin stickers. There was only 1 left in the fleet. Wow. And that was used for pilots sort of check rides, instrument rating tests, etc., etc. So in the back cockpit, you'd have all the flight instruments up front, you'd have a set of throttles and a stick. But on the day, the stick was removed. That was quite standard with the Phantom. Okay. If you had a nav in the back, you could just go in, remove the stick, just left the stump down in between your feet on the cockpit floor, but the throttles and all the other stuff was in the back. So the Sherpa minibus drops myself and my pilot off, and we do the standard checks, jump into the jet, fire up the engines and wait, check in, taxi, and airborne as a 5-ship. Actually, we have 6 jets, because the 6th jet is the Whip. That is a spare aircraft that flies around us when we're getting the formation set up. And it might just give us a little bit of advice on position keeping. Might just say, you know, whatever the call sign is, black 4 in the rear right, just tighten up, move up left, and just that position's good, hold that position. So the brief was also that if we'd lost any jet in the formation through unserviceability, they could just step into any aircraft position.
Got you.
Again, quite a tall order.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful morning. We get airborne, I think 9 o'clock in the morning, go out east, and just to get the fuel weight down, we do a couple of practice intercepts, I think like 3v3 intercepts over the North Sea standard. And then once we've got the fuel weight down, which eases the formation and the aircraft handling, we're called into close formation. Now it takes a little bit of a while just to get all the jets into the St. Andrews cross formation, and we're flying straight and level, but the Whip says, yep, that's good, you're all in formation. And then we start to do some manoeuvring. And a little bit of gentle manoeuvring was in the brief, so we do a gentle left turn, you know, 60 degrees angle of bank. We're sort of juggling around our position a little bit. I'm looking over my shoulder thinking, this is really close, but it's fine. These guys, they've all done it before. They know what they're doing. I'm the junior guy here, fair enough. And then we do another turn, increasing the angle of bank. And then we reverse that turn with a bit more of an increased angle of bank. And that's where very quickly it all goes horribly wrong. So there had been a tendency that was noted for our aircraft was just moving a little bit, you know, forwards and backwards in formation, probably because what are the formation references to do? But, you know, it was okay, it wasn't looking too untidy. But as we reverse this turn, all of the 4 aircraft had effectively slid slightly out of right of position from the lead aircraft. Right. The lead aircraft is always going to be in the right place. Everybody else is wrong when it comes to formation. That's the way it is. So when this happens, my pilot then starts to maneuver back into the position he'd been keeping while the jet in the center is still stabilizing out of position, so a little bit further right. I'm looking over my shoulder, and suddenly I am looking down the right intake now of the aircraft, and really I suddenly understand we're going to hit. So I come out with an expletive, I'll keep that short, and I just say, we're going to hit. And I just turn around and duck, and as I turn around and duck, there is this sort of sickening shunt up the back end as we come together. So really what had happened is the rear left of our aircraft now had impacted the underneath of this other aircraft's nose, scraped back. We were impacting onto their wing leading edge as well. So for a split second, we're almost locked together like as two sort of mating insects, you know, 2,000 feet and 350 knots over the North Sea. Very quickly then, while I'm still turned around and ducked, I hear this noise, like a doof noise. And my initial reaction was, and it sounds absurd now, was we'd had an engine surge. Never had one before. I thought, must have had an engine surge. Look up, and my cockpit is just full of dust, dirt, rubbish. 30 years worth of just general cockpit detritus is now coming back into my cockpit. And now I have this, this moment of realization that my pilot's gone. He's ejected. And he hasn't even told me.
Really?
Now, in the Phantom, that was the standard operating procedure. The Mark of Phantom that we were flying in did not have command eject. It's not like the Hawk here, whereas if the settings are made, if one crew member pulls the handle, takes the other one out. We did not have that capability in the FG-1. Indeed, it wasn't in the FGR-2, the other Marker Phantom that the Royal Air Force flew pretty much at that time. So the brief was, if you see my boots, follow me out. That's pretty much what he did. The reason behind that was, I think it was the early 70s, there was an F4, and again I was thinking, I think it was in Germany, maybe Bruggen. I know guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an occurrence happened, I think on recovery, and the navigator ejected a split second before the pilot. And we are talking real, literal fractions of a second. So his canopy separated the aircraft, his seat is now just leaving the aircraft. As the pilot's ejecting, his canopy comes out, strikes him, kills him. So because of that, the standard operating procedure was, if you see my boots, follow me out. Oh, yeah. That way we wouldn't have, after you, no, after you, come on, one of us has got to eject first. You know, if there was no doubt, emergency ejection, pilot goes, I follow out. So I've had this moment now realizing I'm on my own in 27 tons of jet. And what the jet is now doing, though I'm not really aware 100% of this now, it's going into pretty violent pitch up and it's rolling above the rest of the formation. The impact really that we'd taken was on the rear left stabilator, which I just mentioned. Now the F4, it was flowed on the stabilators, massively powerful controlled surfaces. So we had taken the brunt of the impact on that surface. I don't know if it'd come off, but effectively it had flicked the jet out of control. My pilot had one immediate action, unload for control. Nothing happened with the aircraft, thought, wife, daughter, I'm out of here. So he ejected. Good decision. Yes. But I'm still now in 27 tons of jet on my own, you know, thinking, oh, he's gone. So that's the first second taken, you know, and then I look out the left quarter light. Time does funny things to you in this situation. I'm looking out the left quarter light and I'm looking at the North Sea rolling very rapidly now in my left vision. And again, for a second, this second thinking, I wonder if I can ride this one out.
No, you didn't.
I did. And then I decided, no, that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea. So now I knew I was going to have to eject as well. Meanwhile, when the jet is doing this, the navigator in the rear left aircraft is really aware of what's going on. You can see this massive Phantom, empty front cockpit, me still in the back. And he shouts on the radio, Herbie, eject, 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 don't. Because now, I don't hear any of this, thankfully. The jet is now rolling and starting to go upside down over the other aircraft in the formation. And had I gone then, I probably would have had a good chance of impacting one of those guys while still in my seat, which would have been, you know, that would have been game over, pretty much. Yeah. So, third second, thinking, this is basically really going to hurt. Because another story before, 9 months before, I'd broken my back. Doing something for the squadron, I'd fallen about 10 feet, maybe a bit more, doing the assault course, into soft sand. No, I was pretty unlucky for my first year or so. Knees gave way and I impacted on my coccyx and I suffered spinal compression fractures right down on the base of my spine. So that was 3 months off flying. And I thought, this is really going to hurt me now. This is really going to hurt, but I've got to do it. And I'm also aware I've got a camera on my right knee. I used to fly with a camera quite a bit. So now everything's happening at once. I am putting the lap straps, pushing the camera off my right knee onto the cockpit floor because I didn't want that coming out with me and maybe striking me as I'm leaving the aircraft. Going for the seat pan handle and giving it one almighty pull. Now, I'm not the biggest person in the world, probably not like the big, strongest bench pressing person in the world, and pulling an ejection seat handle, it's one hell of a lifting pull to do. Isn't it? Yeah, but basically the brief was, go for the seat pan. For us, always go for the seat pan handle was the brief with the F4. We had the face screen handles, but I think there was a tendency to do that and maybe arch your back forwards, whereas if you did the seat pan, you'd pull it up and you generally would push your back into a better sitting posture into the seat. Also, it would tend to push your legs forward a little bit so that your thigh bones were on the seat as well. Because you didn't want any space between the seat and the thigh bones for an impact like that, because it could really damage your legs. Ouch, you know, it's going. Yeah. So I went for the seat pan handle, big pull, and then again, it seemed to me nothing happened, because time does strange things. And I thought, bloody hell, it's not gone. And while I'm thinking of this, obviously the most violent thing that ever happened in my life happened, and the seat went. So my eyes were firmly shut, but I was aware of the bang. Actually, it's more like a really, really loud crack. Flash, light of the rocket motors going, and smoke. There was just so much smoke. The seat was a sort of Mark 7 seat, so it had a bang to initially sort of get you out of the aircraft to start moving you. And then the rockets would come in, and give you a smoother acceleration. But yeah, big smell of smoke. And then I was aware as well, I was aware of everything. So leaving the aircraft, and then the slipstream, you know, hitting like 350 mile an hour wind. I was aware I was tumbling, and then I could hear these little whirs and clicks going off behind me. And that was the barometric time release unit doing its stuff, which would fire out a drogue, which would pull out a small parachute, which would then pull out my big parachute. And the next thing was a huge snap, and I'm in my parachute. And all that from pulling the seat pan handle to being in a parachute is about a second.
That's mad, isn't it?
It's an incredible piece of engineering. It's an amazing invention how the sequential working all works as well to make it operate safely like that. And the barometric time release unit, that's a very, very clever piece of equipment. That senses your altitude. So if you're above 10,000 feet, it will not start the sequencing to separate you from the seat because you're too high. It will wait until you're below 10,000 feet, go, yeah, you're below 10K, and now start to basically separate you from the seat. Right. Reason behind that is just, you know, oxygen. But it also senses acceleration and all sorts of other things. And the Mark 16 seats you're going to find in an F-35, I think it's a Mark 16, are even more intelligent as well. It can sense a lot more things. Anyway, my seat was definitely a design of the 60s, but it worked for me. So I'm in my chute, going, whoa, 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 and I'm swearing quite loudly for 4 or 5 seconds. I open my eyes, there's quite a bit of blood everywhere, and in my line of sight, I can see the other 4 jets.
No, really?
Yeah, I can see the other jets, I can see all their exhaust, I can see the smoke out the back, just separating away from me, heading away. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I see this huge white flash. And I look down, and that's the jet that I just left behind. And, you know, huge circle expanding now, sort of boiling, bubbling of water, the water coming down, the splash, the jet had gone. So it was not much time for me actually ejecting to the jet impacting. Wow. So to give you an idea, we impacted about 2,000 feet above the sea. I think I ejected when the jet was about 1,400 feet above the sea, because in this stage it sort of pitched, rolled, and was now going to like its death dive behind the rear left of the formation. So the jet was very much nose down when I went out of it. So it all happened very, very quickly.
That's crazy.
So the next thing, the one that sort of got my senses together was thought, best I get on and survive now. I had this overwhelming sense of survival. I'd left the aircraft, but really this is now the start of the story, I think, because you're very well trained in the Air Force about survival drills, and now it's time to get on with the survival drills, and they're done so regularly. They do become instinctive. So looking up, check the parachute. Yeah, the parachute's deployed. That's nice. No twists in the rigging lines. Flick the visor up and realize then there's a lot of blood on the visor, but I flipped that one up. Go to remove the oxygen mask, but that's been torn away by the violence of the ejection. One of the hooks had just been torn away. So that was dangling loose. And then looking down, we were flying in life jackets that were pre-automatic, so I had to inflate my own life jacket. So a sharp tug, life jacket, you know, inflates, got these huge orange stoles around you, which kind of reduce your ability to look around a little bit. And then one of the most important things is looking after your survival pack, because that really is your future. You sit on the survival pack on the seat, it comes with you when you eject, and it's sort of connected by some straps and what are known as Martin Baker clips. Very, very clever clips. You clip yourself to the seat, and that seat is your lifesaver. So what you have to do then is find 2 other clips which have gone somewhere up there by your back, and disconnect one of those clips. And then the pack will drop down on a lanyard and sort of swing about 15 feet below you.
Yeah.
If you disconnect the wrong clip, then do that, the pack will just fall into the sea, and you've lost your dinghy and you've lost everything else. That's pretty important.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So I got that right and looked down, and there's my pack swinging 15 feet or so below me. Now, other thoughts that go through your mind, I didn't know about my pilot. He'd gone. I didn't know if he was okay, so I was quite concerned, obviously, about that. He was fine. He could see me, because he'd ejected higher up than me, so he could look down and see me, but I couldn't look up and see him because there was this big parachute in the way, but he could see that I was okay. And then I was thinking, oh God, how am I going to tell my mum about this? You know, she was pretty interested in my career, as was my father. I was still pretty young, and I thought, I'm going to have to tell them about this, and, you know, get the words right and everything else. And then the sea starts to come up pretty quickly. When I ejected the first bit, I could still see the coast. We are 55 miles east of Dundee, roughly. So for a while I can still see the Scotland on the horizon, but as I get lower and lower, it disappears and all I can see is the sea, and then I start to feel a bit lonely. And then you can hear the sea, you can hear the slap of the waves. It was a lovely day, actually. The sea was pretty calm. I'm guessing now it's probably about 100 feet above the sea. It's very, very hard to judge your height. But one of the things you were always briefed on was don't go into the water still in your parachute, because you get all caught up with it and everything else. And the drill was, when you see your personal survival pack hit the water, you know you're 15 feet, separate yourself from your parachute. Right. And part of the teaching was then, you had a quick release box, pretty standard, which you could bang it, or give it a good little thump, which is exactly what I did. And next thing, I'm in the water. What I didn't know was really you shouldn't thump your quick release box. You should give it a gentle squeeze, thumbs behind and squeeze it, because by thumping it, I'd sort of given it a bit of a geometric lock. So I went into the North Sea, still in my parachute, unaware of this, because I'd never ejected before, I'd never parachuted before, and I'd never jumped into the North Sea 55 miles east of Dundee before. These are all new things, new sensations and everything else. I'm on a pretty steep learning curve. So there I am, I'm in the water, the jacket is inflated, I'm looking good, and start to pull using the lanyard, 15 feet of sort of cord to get the personal survival pack to me, flip it over, find the handle, give the handle a good pull, and the dinghy inflates. Just like in the swimming pool or in the sea drills, which we do one or the other, you know, twice a year. They always inflate upside down, so then you have to flip it over, and they have little handles on the side, grab handles, and again, adrenaline is really pumping like you wouldn't believe. But very, very quickly, I pull myself into the, into the dinghy, flip myself over, sit up, and I'm thinking now I'm pretty safe. But I'm still in my parachute. The parachute's sinking. So this is like really bad now. So now I realise this very quickly. So I have to now unlock the quick release box, get all the straps off me, the shoulder straps, lap straps, and just throw what I can now into the North Sea. But the other bad thing is I'm caught in the rigging lines. So adrenaline must have been working, because I pulled myself into the dinghy, still with a parachute and all the rigging lines and everything else around me, which is pretty heavy. And that's going down, and it's just taking the front of the dinghy down with it as well.
Is it really? Wow.
And I feel myself sort of being pulled a bit as well. I think this isn't good, not happy with this. Now on our G-pants, we had an aircrew knife. It was sort of, referred to as being pretty useless. It was blunt, but that blade that morning became the sharpest blade in the North Sea. So with a few sort of deft, cutting actions, I got the rigging lines done, shook those off, and now I'm 100% clear of the chute, which never see again. Off it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
There we are. And then you get on with the drills. So I'm in the dinghy, and again the training kicks in. So the first thing you do are a few puffs, blow up and inflate the floor slightly. That gives you insulation from the cold North Sea. And then you get the shoulder bit, so you've already got the shoulder over you of the orange assembly of the dinghy, but again you inflate that, and you're alternating the inflation now between the floor and the side, and then you do up your stole, your canopy, you've got some buttons there, and that gives you good protection against the elements. So now I'm starting to get a bit warm and snug inside the dinghy. I've still got my helmet on, which was the brief, and now I think there's a lot of blood here. And I actually thought about that descending. So I started to give myself a bit of because it was obviously there. Yeah. And I'd taken out the inside of my lip, because I obviously bit my lip, or the ejection had done that to my lip. So that was quite bad. But the other thing is I had quite a deep cut in my chin. It wasn't big, but it was quite deep. So on the F4 with our life jacket, we had the assembly to connect it. It wasn't buttons, it was a breastplate. 2 bits of metal, you put them into each other, clip, and that would lock the breastplate. And mounted on there was your oxygen regulator, and that controlled basically air mix oxygen 100%, but that's where you put your oxygen mask and tube into the regulator and connected you to the aircraft's oxygen system. The snag was, when you eject, strange things happen in your body, and I had physically chinned the regulator. Now if you try and chin it, you're not going to do it, and that shows the forces that are imposed on your spine when you eject. And the other thing is, if you see anybody from an F4 or a Harrier, they had the same kind of jacket, who's ejected, they're all going to have like the same cut on their chin where they've actually impacted it. So now I'm just sort of waiting and hoping the helicopter's going to come. So for that, we have our little radio, our little personal locator beacon. So I make sure that is operating, which it is quite nicely. get the aerial going in the right place, bailing out water, doing all these drills, keep myself warm, comfortable, preparing some of the aids that we got for location. So we had two main systems that I was using. One were mini flares, which is like a pencil, and you'd screw in a little flare, little spring switch with your thumb, and I fired off one or two of those just to let the guys who were in the other jets know that I was in the dinghy and I was basically okay. And the other thing I let off was a smoke flare. So we used to fly with two day-night smoke flares. One end was for day, and that was orange smoke. And then the other end was night, and that was a very bright flare. Great, great aids. So again, I let off one of the smoke flares just so the guys on the ground, sorry, in the air, could see me in the sea and know that I was okay. And this is one of the things when it came to the Board of Inquiry, I got some criticism because I was wearing on the day American flying gloves. Big no-no, but I was. Oh. Not the standard RAF Cape leather flying gloves. Now, when I said to the board about this, my hands were actually nice and warm because the material kind of just went onto my hands, absorbed water and was lovely and warm. Whereas my pilot was wearing the Cape leather gloves, which is like having a chamois leather to do your car windscreen. Horrible, slimy, cold things. So later on, my hands were still really good. But the smoke flare, it's a bit like a top of a Coca-Cola can or a soft drink can. It's got like a little old ring pull, and you need a fingernail or something to actually make that ring pull work. Doing it with the thick end of a glove isn't going to do it. So I sort of bit it off with my teeth, that's the glove, did the flare, made it work, put my gloves back on. Fact is, I had to take my gloves off to drew some criticism later on for the Board of Inquiry. Really? But we'll talk on that later. But the other side of the story I was trying to make is that my hands were 100% dexterity, when I was picked up. And I was just sitting there and I'm thinking about taking a seasickness tablet, and then in the distance I can start to hear the thud of a helicopter. So I sort of burst open now the buttons that I've done on the life jacket, look around, and there in the distance I can start to see one of our yellow helicopters, search and rescue helicopters. It's like, wow, yes, excellent. And this is about 25 minutes in from ejection. B Flight 22 Squadron was based at Lucas. We knew a lot of the guys there who flew the yellow helicopters, the old Wessex, I think in the day, and 10 o'clock was their shift change. We'd ejected at 9:58 in the morning. By the time they got the message, they were literally around the table doing the handover brief from the off-going crew to the on-going crew. And air traffic came through on the squawk box as it was then. There's been a mid-air, one Phantom down, two shoots seen, a position. So the crews look at each other for a split second and then they both run. So the off-going crew take a helicopter and the on-going crew take a helicopter as well. So there's two helicopters coming for us. Again, my pilot, I don't know how he is, but he can see me because he is downwind of me, so, sorry, upwind of me, so he can actually look out of his dinghy and see me in mine, but I can't see him. So again, back into the drill, start to get ready for the helicopter now. So again, as the helicopter approaches and descends, I let off another smoke flare, clear all the debris away from me that's around my legs from the personal survival pack, all the mess and everything I've got out. And then on the jacket, we have some hooks. And I just basically get those hooks off the popper studs and get them ready for the winchman to put a hook into and get me out. So the helicopter gets lower, gets closer, I'm looking up, I can see the pilot, I can see this big grin and this big 8 ears, kind of like porn star moustache. So I know immediately it's George, one of the pilots who I knew from 22 Squadron who was flying that helicopter. And I'm watching the winchman coming down towards me as well, which is really comforting sight. Now, one of the things again on training about the winchman is you're passive. You do the smoke so they can judge wind for their approach. You've got your little hook, your thing ready for their hook, but you never reach out for the winchman or anything like that or try and make yourself useful. They own you. And one of the reasons you don't do that is if you ever watch a winchman, below them they've got an aerial. It's actually like an electrostatic rod because they are electrostatically charged. They're flying on a helicopter, the rotor blades, if you touch them, you're going to get a big electric shock. So you let the little rod go into the water first, that decharges them, and then basically Lenny, the winchman, crashed into me in my dinghy, said, "It's all right, I got you." And before I know it, and I'm hooked on. So now he's got me safe. Helicopter basically starts to winch me up just a tiny bit, but allows me just to slightly separate from the dinghy. So then he's got a really sharp knife. very big sharp knife, and he's cutting other bits, the lanyard that I'm still connected to the dinghy with and everything else, a few rigging lines that are still hanging around, but basically safely separates me from the dinghy. He's wrapped around a stole around me, so I'm really safe, and I'm winched up into the helicopter. At this time as well, a third helicopter is coming from Bulmer, a Sea King. They're a bit late because they've got further to go, and they collect the dinghies. So my pilot's in one helicopter, I'm in the other helicopter, I'm laid down flat, they remove my helmet, and now we're heading west towards Dundee. So from ejection to being picked up was about 32 minutes, I think. So what had been going on while I was sort of wallowing around in the North Sea for 32 minutes? Well, first of all, the jet that we'd had the impact with, they had quite a bit of damage to the underside of the nose, the damage to the right engine intake, and the leading edge as well. That had taken quite a bit of impact, and the right external fuel tank was bent and distorted. So they started to recover back to Lucas. A jet that was going through an instructional mission from 228, the operational conversion unit, came up alongside, gave them a good visual inspection, and they did a straight into land at Lucas. Probably went for a drink or got the notes going for the board. We then had two jets giving us top cover. So they were acting as a radio link. Comms initially were very, very busy. Everybody jumped on the radio to try and put out the message that there'd been in midair and we had ejected. So eventually we said, no, one jet will now do the talking. But again, in those days, there were a lot of things that weren't really done. We didn't really have good procedures for an on-scene commander that we had later on in my flying career. What to do if you lose an aircraft, either training or operationally? Who has the hammer now on flying top cover and coordinating rescue assets? I don't think we were that good at it back in '87, to the degree that two of the jets that were given top cover came very close to hitting each other, flying opposite sides of the circle over the top of us at the same height. I didn't know that until a couple of years later, doing a flying authorizers course, and I was shown the full board of inquiry.
Really?
And the group captain, who I'd met before anyway, an ex-Lightning pilot, sort of showed me that bit, and I just thought, I never knew that. But they came very, very close. So they gave us top cover until we were picked up. So we go to Dundee. We land into Dundee. We're in the helicopter now for quite some time, about 30 minutes. I think they're just getting ready to receive us. And that gives time for the media to pitch up, take some photos. I've got some cuttings I'll show you later, and then we'll stretch it out into Dundee, into Nine Wells Hospital, and I'm flat on my back. And I'm in quite a bit of pain, obviously just sort of superficial cuts, bruises, but my back is hurting, and I know that I've probably redone my back again. So I'm sort of quite happy to be on the stretcher at this stage. So we go in, and the consultant, the doctor, whoever comes, says, right, where's my ejectees? And he looks at us, and we are still in flying kit. Our life jackets have been deflated by the rescue, the helicopter crew, but still in all the flying kit, G-pants are still on, and he's looking at this going, oh. Next thing he does, he just grabs my jacket and pulls it to try and get it off, and it arches my back, and I sort of shriek in pain. And he lets go of me, and I fall back onto the, onto the stretcher or whatever I was on. So I said, no, just undo it like that. But now the rest of it, it's one of the assistants comes up with the biggest sort of pair of scissors I've ever seen, and the rest of my flying kit, it's just cut off me. Really? It's like, just in shreds. So there we are, given it like a surgical smock or something, quick X-ray, and now sort of hanging around seeing what happens next. And that's the first time I was able to see my pilot. Big handshake, glad to see that he's okay and everything else. He's got the identical cut on the chin to me and everything else. And we sort of, say, what happened there? And sort of talk about our experiences that we've been through. About an hour later, a visitor comes along, and it's one of the flight commanders from the squadron who drives in. And he comes in, and he goes, good to see you. He goes, God, you're a mess. And he's looking at my face. It's like, oh, thanks very much. Yeah, I can feel I am, the stitches are there. He said, good news is I've had a good word with the doctors, and you're good to go. So we can go. Okay, blimey, that was pretty quick.
Wow.
So just basically jump into the squadron's mini metro with the flight commander driving, not wearing very much, just a surgical smock, and he said, what we'll do, we'll go back to the mess, put some more clothes on, and come back to the squadron. So I was living at the mess, go back to my room, put some uniform back on. It's probably about midday now, go to the squadron, go straight to the ops desk, and it's like a cheer as I walk back into the ops desk just a few hours after jumping out of the jet. So and he said, right, well, go back to the room, relax, bar's opening at 5. Okay, fantastic, you know, off we go. So I go back to the mess, have a cup of coffee in the ante room, and everybody's looking at me and what have you. And sure enough, the bar opens at 5. Everybody from Trouble 1 Squadron is there because we've had an ejection, but the 2 guys are fine. The guys in the other jet are all fine as well. So, you know, nobody's dead. That's good.
Yep.
43 Squadron, they join in because we'd borrowed their jet. It's like, sorry, boss, 43, you know. Meanwhile, all the pilots going, woo, woo, no more check rides, because we'd lost the 2 sticker. So they're all quite happy about that, you know. But the boss of 43 was not quite so impressed. I'd offer. And then all the instructors and students came in from the conversion unit because they thought, blimey, there's a party on the mess. Well, we'll just cancel flying and join in as well. So the bar that night was absolutely rocking, and that was probably one of the best things that could have happened to me.
Rather
you know,
yeah,
you go through something that is like hugely traumatic, and it is. You know, it's a very, very profound thing to go and do. Wild ride, big day out, but to be in the bar with all of your squadron colleagues, the station colleagues, everything else was just fantastic. And really, everybody wanted to know about it, and you can't stop talking. And you know, you'd look away, and another beer would be coming into your hand. Look the other direction, another beer would be coming into your hand. And I think I managed to keep going till about 10 o'clock. And it's like, right, I just need to go now and sleep. And before I left the bar, one of the experienced navs from the squadron who'd had an appalling accident in a Canberra some years before, where he wasn't able to eject and he went down the runway still in his seat but survived. He said, whatever you do, before you go to bed, before you go to sleep, write everything down. So I did. One of the squadron friends sort of made sure I got back to my room with no more injuries, and then I just sort of sat down at my desk and pulled out some paper and I started to write. And I just wrote down my account of that day, which was pretty useful because events can get distorted with memory. So when people are going, that's all a bit far-fetched, you're going, well, I don't think it is actually. It's all actually as it happened, written down that evening. And then I went to sleep.
Oh, just like
So there we go. Next morning, woke up, normal time, had a hangover from hell, you know, grabbed some water, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought, God, you do look a state. So I had huge bruising around the eyes, bridge of the nose from my visor, big cut, stitches, swollen bottom lip, and then bruises, real amazing bruises. The shoulder straps from the ejection seat, lap straps, and also leg restraints. So everywhere there was something on the seat that was holding me to it was effectively bruised. Now, I'd never been beaten up then or now, thankfully, but I felt like I'd just been hit by a bus. You know, I was aching all over. So put some clothes on, went down to breakfast in the mess, grabbed some of the papers, and it's quite strange reading about yourself in the next morning's papers, and then go over to the squadron. Now, clearly I'm not on the flying program, so I said, right, so what's happening next? So one of the execs comes up and said, right, well, the Board of Inquiry are coming up this afternoon, and they want to chat with you and your pilot and just first impressions. So make yourself available and just go on in, and then we'll just see what happens. So that's pretty much what happens. You know, I think 2 o'clock in the afternoon, get called into the office, and there's the Board of Inquiry. There's a standard Board of Inquiry, so there's a wing commander presiding it, a Phantom guy, a squadron leader is the aircrew member, and I can't remember if it was a flight lieutenant or a squadron leader engineer, but that's the standard makeup of a Board of Inquiry in those days. And it was informal. It was sat down, bit of a chat, what happened, am I okay? They're making notes, I don't make any notes, but that's it, done. 5 o'clock, bar's open, woohoo, back to the bar, load more beer. Wednesday's quite a big day out. Now, looking after ejectees in those days was very, very, very different in the 80s to what happens now. If guys eject now, they get amazing care right on the spot and, you know, all the way through. It wasn't quite so mature in those days. So for Wednesday, it's been arranged by the medical centre and Royal Air Force Hospital at Halton that we go down there basically for some checks. So early in the morning, a car pitches up at the mess, myself, pilot, jump in the car. We drive down to Edinburgh Airport, British Airways, Boeing 757, we run onto that, sit down, a couple of gin and tonics, fly down to Heathrow, get out the other side, jump into another car, go to Halton, and we're met, and they inject us with sort of like an isotope. And that shows that if you've got any hot spots, especially bone hot spots, you know, crush fractures, that sort of stuff, and that should reveal it. So we hang around for a couple of hours, and then a technician comes back, and he's holding a piece of paper and some sort of like flimsy plates, and says, well, we've had a look, and you're good, so you're good to go. really?
Okay.
Is that it? Yeah, you're good to go. The transport's waiting to pick you up. So back into the transport, back to Heathrow, back on the return, British Airways, Boeing 757, back to Edinburgh, a few more gin and tonics, transport back to Lucas, bars open. That's Wednesday. Okay, this is quite strange, but I've never done this before either. You know, it's all unknown territory.
Yeah, cool.
So Thursday's a pretty big day, but the first thing I do is something I did want to do and I've been thinking about, is go around the station and say my thank yous. So managed to get the bar open, spend quite a bit of my money. I wasn't getting paid much in those days as a flying officer, but get beers, bottles of wine, and I go around the station. So I start off with the squadron with our safety equippers. So they would have been the people who routinely looked after my flying kit, my dinghy, my helmet, and all of that sort of stuff. And without any of that, you know, I wouldn't be here. Then I go around to the main station survival area, because that's where they really look after packing parachutes, more in-depth servicing of flying kit to make sure everything works. And you have to understand, these are highly qualified, trained people who do this stuff day in, day out, hoping it never gets worked, never gets used. And indeed, for most of the time, it never gets used. A parachute never gets used. So they just go and do it day in, day out, and never think about it probably. We'll hope it doesn't have to be used. And then go to the people who work the ejection seats, who service those, the armourers, both on the squadron and at the station level, because ejection seats get serviced. You know, they get serviced after every trip. They get serviced on a periodic basis. They get taken out of the aircraft, taken apart, put back together. Cartridges, explosives, all have life expiry times on them, so they'd always have, you know, serviceable cartridges in there. So all of that stuff would work. And just as an aside here, I just read John Nichols' book Eject, which I thoroughly recommend as a mate. But one of the chapters is talking about the Argentinian pilots flying A4 Skyhawks in the Falklands in '82, and just before, a guy tried to eject and the cartridge didn't work on the seat. They were out of date. They were all flying pretty much with out of date explosive in their ejection seats. And if you read this chapter, when they got hit and had to pull the handle, it was then a lottery if their seat would fire or not. Wasn't the case with my seat, clearly. Yeah. And then obviously you go and see the boys with the yellow helicopters and say big thanks to the helicopter crew for actually coming out and pulling me out. And they were just delighted, you know, to go and pull out some of their aircrew. And then in the afternoon, it was the Board of Inquiry time. And this is the formal section now. So I'm in there, there's no legal advice, there's no real briefing, you swear, you know, the evidence you'll give, you know, on the Bible, the oath and everything else will be the whole truth, blah, blah, blah. And there's a stenographer who's making notes of everything you say. And they just ask me the questions, and I talk about the day verbatim, pretty much as I'm doing, you know, now, but they are asking some pretty pointed questions. And just about the wrap up, and I'm thinking, no, it's going all right so far. And they go, oh, one final question. I said, whose responsibility was it for collision avoidance between my jet and the one in the middle? And they go, well, it was briefed, that was mine. And they go, thank you, no more questions. Right. And I walked out and I thought, oh, they've got me. You know, they are going to nail me now because I had the collision avoidance responsibility and we collided. So I was feeling a bit low after that, and there we go. So that was Thursday done. Back to the bar, a few more beers. Friday, ground training, and then as was standard at Lucas after happy hour, down in St Andrews and carry on, you know, have a sort of Friday night out. And as was again common, it finishes off with curry, and about 10 o'clock, I have to go to the loo. Ejecting does funny things to your spine. It crushes all sorts of bits where nerves work and things like that. Hadn't realised, I hadn't really been to the loo properly for about 5 days, and now I'm in the loo in the curry house, just coming out. And the manager's there waiting, and he says he's putting the phone down, and he just asks if I'm Mr. Hancock. So yeah, that's me. He said, we just had a call from the medical centre at Lucas. They're on the way with an ambulance. They want you to lie down. It's like, what? Yeah, you've got to lie down. There's an ambulance coming for you. So I think, I'm not going to do that. I've been running around since Monday. You know, back's a bit sore, but I'm okay. So I go back and sit down at the table with the team and carry on eating. And about 20 minutes later, a couple of RAF medics come into the curry house, which is very small, and it's like in a basement floor, and they're trying to wield in this huge stretcher, which you'd see in something like Dad's Army. It really was
like comical almost.
Yeah, it was comical. They couldn't get it around the steps, they couldn't get it through the door, and they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and I was just like, oh, I'll just walk over to you. Yeah. So I walk over, say, see you to the team, and get in the ambulance. But what I don't realise now, earlier in that day, is the Holton people, or the consultant, the proper person, had looked at the medical plates and going, which ward are my ejectees in? And there's a bit of a silence, and they go, well, we said they're fine, they're back at Lucas. And so now they're sort of catching up with me, that I got some pretty serious back injuries, you know, down in my lower spine, the old wedge compression fractures, and they need me back in hospital as soon as possible. Really? So from the ambulance into the medical centre, into like a little ward. I hang around there for a weekend on a Monday. An Andover aeroplane comes up, it's an Aeromed, so I'm stretchered properly this time, sort of bolted into a stretcher in the Andover, and I'm flown down, I think, to Benson, and then in another ambulance, and then I go basically into the hospital.
Really?
Yeah, and that was a pretty low period for me, because being with the squadron mates is great, was the best thing for me, but now I am just stuck in a side ward, and I'm there for 3 weeks. I'm on my own, nobody to talk to, nothing to do. I didn't have time to grab any books from my room in the mess. I don't know if you remember daytime television, September '87, but there wasn't much to watch. You know, I learned how to do the cryptic crossword and what have you, but it was a pretty awful time actually. Yeah. 3 weeks, flat on my back, nothing to do but just think. There we go, wondering what the Board of Inquiry were doing.
Did you get your Martin Baker tie?
Yeah.
You did get that?
Oh, I did. I did. I got that very, very quickly. Now, my Martin Baker number is 5,654, 5654.
That's stuck up there as well.
Yeah, but the one that's really stuck in the letter was I was the 2,081st person to eject from an F4.
Really?
Think about that for a second. That's a lot. 5,000 were built, so you're roughly looking, you know, 1,000 had ejections. It's a lot more nuanced than that, but that's 2,081 people ejecting from an F4.
That is crazy when you think about it.
It is.
The numbers, yeah.
It is. At the end of the process, I did eventually get some really, really good medical care. So I do my 3 weeks in Halton on my own. I have one visitor I remember. Guy walked in, strange looking chap, very tall, very thin, very academic looking. And he came in, sort of introduced himself a little bit. And he sat down and he looked at me for a while, you know, sort of with interest, and asked me a few questions about how I was I sleeping, any nightmares, feelings of resentment or anger, and I sort of answered the questions, and he goes, yeah, pretty normal, you're fine. And that was my assessment.
Okay.
That was like the psychologist coming in, you know, and doing his assessment on me. So that was all part of the aftercare in those days.
Yeah.
You know, PTSD didn't exist, not known about back in '87. So that was that chap, and that, you know, wrote a little report which went into the inquiry. So 3 weeks later, I'm released from hospital, but I'm on a 3-month grounding, standard 3-month grounding after ejection, no flying. But I'm back with the squadron.
Oh, so you're actually working, you weren't at home for that 3 weeks?
No, I'm back now with the squadron at Lucas, which is great, best place for me.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks after that, we're off to Cyprus. 5 weeks, we're going to do our air-to-air gunnery armament practice camp. Now, clearly I can't fly, but I'm going to go to Cyprus anyway, because there's no point being left at home on my own. So I'm on the VC-10, we're engines running. We are basically on the point of taxiing, about to close the door, steps leave, and there's this screech of a black Mini Metro, and the station medical officer, she is running up the steps.
Oh God.
Looking for me, because she's heard I'm on the VC-10 going to Cyprus. Now, when you fly, you have a medical category. In the Air Force, it used to be A1, G1, Z1. And that meant you were fully fit, ejection seats, go anywhere. Well, I've been downgraded. So clearly I wasn't fully fit. I was clearly not up to flying on ejection seats at the moment. And I was confined to the UK. And I didn't know any about this. And she's quite angry because now I'm off to Cyprus, you know. And this is really the first time I've had contact as well with the medical centre at Lucas. And somebody says, Herbie, duck! So, you know, I'm sort of making myself as low as possible in the VC-10. Meanwhile, the loadmaster and one of the squadron execs, one of the flight commanders, are at the door saying, no, he's not on here, get off, we're taxiing. So, you know, she's off down the steps, you know, step support away, door shut, we taxi, get airborne. It's sort of like, can I come out now? And the irony is, we're going to Cyprus, I'm going to Akrotiri, where they have a full-up medical centre. And even better, on the peninsula, there used to be a fully equipped, you know, RAF hospital there as well.
But did you not get a bollocking for that? Like, why didn't you come off the VC-10?
No, it's never heard of again.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
So you got away with it?
Got away with that one. Yeah. I think they got in touch. And I think Cyprus said, oh, he's fine here, we'll look after him, no problems at all, you know. Yeah. And again, being in Cyprus 5 weeks with the squadron was the best thing for me. Maybe not for my physical health, because every night was like a party in the bar, going out for a kebab, so I think I put on a couple of stone in that period. But again, for mental health, being with the squadron, being part of the team, that was vital.
Just getting straight back into
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that was incredibly important, actually. So the 3 months comes to an end, go for an assessment and they ask how I am. I said, well, I can actually still feel a bit of an ache in the base of my spine. So a few letters, phone calls are exchanged, and this is where it does get quite good. I go down to Headley Court, down south of London. Now, this is before Headley Court became known nationally through the amazing work they did for severely injured people, wounded people coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan. But it was there up and running for ejectees, people who'd broken bones. There are actually sports people were there as well, where companies could pay and go and get very, very, very good rehab treatment. So I was there, and I was basically there for 3 weeks, and it was like fit camp. It was fantastic. So I start every morning with aerobics. I'd have hydropool sessions, you know, go into the swimming pool where the water's at body temperature, and effectively doing lots of exercises in there.
Full works, yeah.
Yeah, circuit sessions, occupational therapy, academics. They were actually telling me about how my back worked, what had happened to it, and how to look after it in the future.
Wow.
So I was there for 3 weeks, and I came out leaner, fitter, stronger. And the understanding was, you know, if you look after your back, you can still be skiing when you're in your 50s.
Yeah.
But if you start running and doing, you know, double marathons and stuff like that, that's not so good for it. And definitely no more, you know, ejecting or jumping off high buildings.
Yeah, good advice.
But Headley Court, I can't speak highly enough of the people down there. They were amazing and really looked after me brilliantly. So that really takes me up to 5 months. So it's 5 months after the exercise. Squadron's changed. Squadron's always changed a little bit. We had a new boss in, fantastic boss. He loved being on a squadron where most of the aircrew were younger than the jets. He kind of reveled in that.
Yeah.
So he kind of looked after me very much. So it's now getting back to flying. So the first trip back, basically given an F4, given a pilot. It was actually the pilot in the jet that we'd had the collision with. He was the US Marine Corps exchange pilot,
Was that on
Jack.
purpose?
I don't know, but it was great. And we just got airborne, and we just basically just roared around for an hour and a half in a Phantom just to get myself back in the saddle.
Any nerves there?
No.
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 Go for it, ready to go.
Ready to go. I was desperate to go back flying, actually. That said, I never enjoyed close formation in the Phantom again. Just didn't like it. Just didn't like having another jet right by me, you know, like, you know, that close to you on your wing. I didn't mind formating onto somebody so much, but being formated on, you're not in control then so much. I didn't like that. Funnily enough, when I converted to the F3, it was different. Different visual pictures, different sounds, different environment. So I didn't really have that dislike for close formation, you know, in the F3 that I didn't really go, you know, with the F4. It's like, I'd rather not do it if I don't have to do it. But you do it, it's part of the job. But if it came to doing crazy 9 ships again, Diamond 9, it's like, no, thanks.
I'll miss this one.
I'll miss this one out. Yeah. So that was it. So ejected in September, back flying in February. And the other thing is now I had to pick up my training, because the trip before my ejection had been, and probably still is, one of the toughest trips you ever do on the Phantom. It's the check ride that you do before you go and sit quick reaction alert. So you're intercepting 2 aircraft at all altitudes, all speeds, all formations, at night, lights out. And they've got to be perfect. And that was one of the most intense, difficult trips that I'd ever done. And thankfully, that was the trip I'd done before my ejection. So then I sort of got back into the combat ready syllabus and was combat ready, I think.
So you had some luck.
Yeah. So I was combat ready again a couple of months after I started back flying. Yeah. And from there, I really sort of never looked back, you know.
So no trauma in the long run about it?
There was, but I didn't really recognize it for what it was at the time. Being on a Phantom squadron, I think alcohol was always quite a great comfort blanket, but it was many, many years later, and it was with the company I'm with now, and I was working out in Oman. I was going to be flying later in the day, so I was just on the lawns by the hotel, literally sat under a palm tree, reading a book, and I got a message. And it was going, Herbie, we're doing a book, believe you've got a story to tell. And I didn't recognize the phone number, and I just texted back, messaged back, and said, is Andrew's Cross by any chance? And it said, yeah. And it was a chap called Richard Pike, who was a Lightning Phantom pilot, who was going to write Phantom Boys 2. And the boss of the conversion unit, I think, had sort of said, "Ah, this could be a story, get in touch with Herbie." So he had. So when I got back to the UK, I kind of went into the study, and it's a bit of a hoarding place. So I pulled out all the notes from the day, the accident report, I've got all my medical notes, and I just sat down and I put down about 9,000 words, which were condensed into about 6. But part of that, I think, was actually facing up to some of the things that I'd gone through afterwards and realizing that certain bangs or cracks would make me start. I've never been a huge fan of November the 5th, gunpowder, smoke, those smells. It would just bring back that moment of ejection. So yeah, I thought maybe there was something here, like really mild degree of, I don't know if you could call it PTSD or not. It was never diagnosed, it wasn't recognized. But certainly a lot of the indicators were there. And certainly up until that period, every September the 7th, I'd sort of take myself off to a quiet corner and, have a couple of moments of just reflection. Because the ejection seat, it's a wonderful piece of engineering. It saved thousands and thousands of lives and created many, many stories to be made. But without that amazing piece of ejection, I wouldn't have carried on flying. I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't be married. We wouldn't have our incredible daughter. My sort of personal space of life would have finished. You're in that room, you're facing death, the ejection seat gives you the door to get out and lead a second life.
Absolutely.
So for that, and Martin Baker, grateful, doesn't even begin to get there, actually. Doesn't even start to touch, what it does for you.
While we wrap up this part, is there ever like a meeting of like ejectees, like a Martin Bacon event or anything like that? Is that like a thing that happens?
Yeah, so what they used to do is with a letter, you always have an invitation to go down to the factory, and you're sort of welcomed as a bit of a VIP, which I did. And I met the man who built my seat.
Oh, did you really?
Which was quite remarkable. Yeah, I was quite emotional for a little while. And again, for marketing, certainly a while ago, I don't know what they do now, but they'd invite a number of ejectees to go down to Farnborough or other trade shows and say, well, that's the seat, that's the product, but go and talk to the users, and we'd be part of the marketing.
A bit like spokesman kind of.
Yeah, and they also have their wall. So they have a big wall which they take with them now to all the air shows with the names of all the successful ejectees on there.
Have you found your name yet?
I haven't seen it, but other people have found my name and sent me photographs, so yeah, it's up there, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you ejected safely, John, but thank you very much for sharing your story.
Pleasure, thank you very much.